Welcome everyone to another interesting episode of Science Drive Podcast. My name is Nasarime Abi, and today we're checking in into something that affects every single decision that we make. And yes, we probably don't even realize it's happening. One way that I could bring it closer to us is thinking about you going for a movie, and just because you already got a ticket, you're stuck in there and you're not going to come out. Or maybe you're already registered for a gym membership, and because you paid for about 6 months upfront, you just still left it there. Or you're just looking at one of your friend that is stuck in pouring more money into a failing business venture, and you're just wondering, why can't you just walk out of this business? That is just how it comes out to everyone. And what's fascinating about this thing is that it's not just that we do them, we also expect others to do them. And we have this incredible ability to predict who will fall for what psychologists have been able to coin out as sunk cost fallacy and who won't. And so on this interesting episode, I'll be zooming in into a topic: mind predicts waste, for the sunk cost trap. And to join me in discussing an interesting topic based on her own research is Amy Howard. Amy is currently completing her Master's of Art in Psychology at the University of Waterloo, and she is a researcher who is curious about how we reason to make decisions and influence about people and even the world around us. I was caught by her recent research, which was quite innovative, that reveals that something remarkable about our mind is that we don't just fall into decision-making trap, we actually predict them. And her work has been able to explore what it means to have a mind that is capable of waste, of regret, and the unique human burden of caring too much about what we have already lost. Thank you so much, Amy, for joining me to discuss more about your research and what you've been able to come up with in this very innovative research.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate this opportunity to share more about the work that I've done.
Thank you. Also, let's start from the basics. There might be some people who will be joining this call or listening to this podcast anytime and might not really have much knowledge about what the sunk cost fallacy is. We'll want you to just make a simple explanation about this and then walk us through what your research was able to discover about how we can predict this behavior in ourselves and even in others.
Yeah, so the sunk cost fallacy or the sunk cost bias is our tendency to overvalue things that we have invested more time or energy or resources into, even in situations where it seems irrational or like it shouldn't matter which choice that you make. So for example, kind of a classic story is one where you imagine yourself going out to buy a TV dinner for yourself. You're going to get this frozen dinner and then sit down and watch a movie, and you decide to invite your friend over. You got that first dinner on sale for, let's say, $3. But when you go back to the store, you call up your friend, they agree to come and watch that movie, have dinner with you. So you go back to the store, but all the dinners that were on sale are now gone. And so you get them at the full price of, say, $5. But when you get home, you put them in the oven, your friend calls you and says they got sick and they can't make it tonight. So now you have these two frozen dinners that are identical, and they're both cooked, and you have the choice of which one to actually eat and which one to throw away. And a bunch of people would say that they would eat the frozen dinner that costs more, the $5 dinner, rather than the $3 dinner. And this is quite odd because the dinners are identical, so it doesn't really seem like it should matter which one you pick. And so that's showing kind of the influence of what you've invested into past. $3 versus $5 is influencing your decision, even though at the end of the day you've spent $8 and you can't get kind of that $8 back no matter what you pick.
I think that was quite simple, and I'm happy you were able to bring it down to the very relatable example that every one of us at one point or the other have fallen a victim of. Thank you so much for that. So one of the things that caught my attention while reading through your article, and for everyone that might be interested in Amy's article, I'll put the link in the description. If you have interest in reading more about her research, you can always go into the article and read it. So in your research, Amy, you tested whether people expect different types of being. I think you work more with human, children, robots, and even raccoon. You tested maybe we expect them to fall for some cost. I want you to talk more about the patterns that you found and what makes us think that someone can fall for the sunk cost bias or others won't.
Yeah. So we asked people, we gave them a situation that was kind of similar to that TV dinner situation that I just told you about, where this agent was this agent or this being was getting a couple of rocks, one that they invest a lot of effort into and one not so much. And so we asked adults to rate each animal or each agent being on whether or not they thought which rock they thought that the agent would go to get. And then we also asked them to say whether or not they had the capacity for things like frustration, to think about waste, and things like regret and those emotions. And so what we found is that people really expect adults, definitely more than all of the other beings, to be biased by sunk costs and to keep the hard to get rock or the more expensive TV dinner over the less expensive one. But people also expect some agents like elephants to be more likely to be biased by these sunk costs than, say, babies, which might be a bit surprising because you might think that people think that this is specific to humans, that like maybe it's just all people do it, right? But other animals don't. But that's not really the case. It does seem that people are thinking perhaps about the mental capacities of these agents, these beings. So they seem to think that a being that is able to remember things and is able to think about waste might be an elephant, but a baby might not be able to do that yet. So that was one of the kind of key findings that we looked at. There were some mixed results for whether or not people really expected robots to be biased. And something that was interesting about robots specifically is that in the one study where people had expected them to be biased, they hadn't attributed, and they didn't think that robots could feel emotions like regret or frustration. And yet those emotions were on a broad level related to this expectation that people would be biased by sunk costs. So that tells us kind of that emotions like frustration and regret might be related to sunk costs, but people might not expect those to be necessary. So they might be thinking about those and considering those, that somebody who feels regret and frustration would be more likely to be biased by sunk costs. But they might think that just caring so much about waste might kind of be the key thing, and that robot might still care about waste deeply.
I want to take you on this. One of the things that I saw in the article was that you discovered that we expect beings who can recognize waste, which is one of the things that you just mentioned now, to be more likely to fall for sunk costs. This being the underlying mechanism. Now, this sounds somewhat counterintuitive based on what I was reading. I wanted you to kind of make it more clear. Shouldn't being able to spot waste help us to avoid bad decisions, as it may be? Can you tell us what's happening here based on your research?
Yeah. So it's that very fact that we care about waste and we're tracking waste so much that leads us into that sunk cost fallacy, because we're tracking wastes and over applying kind of this rule that we want to avoid waste. So paying attention to situations where there might be waste and avoiding it is really useful for when we're making future decisions and deciding to take the shorter path or buy the dinner that is on sale instead of the one that is at full price. So when we get the sunk cost fallacy, what's happening is that we're kind of over applying that rule that we want to avoid waste to wastes that we've experienced in the past. So that example with the TV dinner, you had $3 and $5, or with the rocks, you spent a lot of energy to get one and less to get the other one. But at the point where you're making the decision, the amount of energy that you've spent and the amount that you've invested into one or the other doesn't really have a bearing and doesn't impact the future wastes that or future costs that you're going to incur. But it's because we care so much about what we've invested that we kind of over apply this, and we kind of feel like keeping the harder to get item or keeping the item that or using the item that we've invested more into feels like less of a waste than using the one that we've invested less into. And so it's kind of because we're still tracking those past costs that we fall into that, and we see that as being less wasteful, even though it doesn't matter at that point in time.
Wow. Thank you again. I will still come to the practical applicability of this, and so I'm trying to create a scenario. Let me paint a picture that everyone might be able to relate to. So let's say I'm a parent and my child just quit a piano lesson that I've invested in for 2 years. I'm sure you know what will come of that. So my question is, how do we mentally judge these decisions? does your research say anything about different expectations for different people, or even based on your general knowledge, maybe during your literature search while you were trying to prepare this paper? What was your take on this generally?
Yeah. So my knowledge of kind of how we judge people, my research touched a little bit less on kind of those moral judgments of that's good and that's bad. But we do know that people kind of view that decision to stop, or they view it negatively, right? So there's a study that was done by Dorison, Humphreys, and Lerner, that they asked people about decision makers, and they found decision makers who abided by the sunk cost bias to be more trustworthy than those that didn't abide by the sunk cost bias. And so that kind of shows us a little bit about kind of that moral view of how we judge people who display the sunk cost bias. We do seem to make, when we're representing these different minds, we do seem to be representing kind of the baby versus like the child and the adult differently. And our expectations for them might influence kind of how we react to them and how we feel about their decisions. I also think that it's kind of important sometimes to take a step back and maybe reprioritize the future costs in the case of something like piano lessons, where you've invested so much into it, but ultimately if you're not enjoying it anymore, all those past costs, if you continue on that path, you're continuing to sink costs into it. And so reprioritizing kind of those future costs and trying not to maybe judge too harshly on that.
Thank you so much, Amy. That was spot on. You mentioned something around regret and frustration, which are key emotions that are associated with sunk cost behavior. And I want to dig deeper into this. For an average person who is trying to take a decision, or who is listening to us right now, what does this tell us about how emotional expectation? I want you to go a little bit more about how emotional expectation might be able to shape our decision making.
Yeah, so there might be a couple of things happening here with kind of that regret and frustration. One thing is that we might reason that somebody who has sunk costs into something and now is realizing that they kind of have waste, now those costs are kind of going to waste, might feel regret and frustration, and that they'll then make a decision based on kind of that regret and frustration might kind of drive them to be biased by sunk costs and to favor the thing that they sunk more time or energy into. But like I had mentioned before about the robot and kind of what it reveals is that regret and frustration might not be necessary. It might kind of just accompany those emotions. It might accompany kind of that experience of having wasted something and experiencing those sunk costs. But we might also kind of expect somebody, it's entirely possible that we might expect somebody to be more biased or to be more likely to do it based on the fact that they feel those emotions. Another thing to note there is that it also could be something like intelligence, which kind of underlies both like the regret and the frustration, kind of emotions that people who are able, and beings who are able to kind of track waste and beings that are able to track waste and think about past events are the beings who are going to feel regret and frustration compared to like happiness or sadness, which a baby probably will feel, but is maybe not going to be related to kind of the sunk cost bias. And so it might be some aspect of the intelligence needed to feel those emotions and the mental capacities needed to feel those that might also be kind of driving the sunk cost bias there. And one of those things might be just being able to recognize when we have wasted something and caring about that waste.
How much intelligence we have to be able to recognize that waste has a way to tell how much we will sink into the sunk cost bias. That was really intelligent, and I appreciate the fact that you were able to share this insight more about what will bring more of those emotions, how they relate with each other. I wanted you to I wanted to continue asking questions, but I think we'll just have to wrap up this way. And I want you to share one key insight you want people to take away. People that are listening who are not psychologists, who are not in your field, but will be interested in this sunk cost fallacy because it affects every one of us. What key insight will you want them to take away about, especially about how we think about thinking, or when it comes to understanding our own selves and even other people's decision-making bias? and every other thing you think people should take handy as part of some of the things that you learned from your research.
Yeah. So one thing I find kind of endlessly fascinating is kind of that the ability to think about what other people are thinking. That is called theory of mind, and we often look at it in kids because it's developing. But the ability to think about what other people are thinking and appreciate that kind of different beings have different capacities for thinking. That they have different knowledge than us and different feelings is such a complicated thing, and it's something that we do so effortlessly, but it really guides kind of our social interactions and our predictions, and of course, what we expect of other beings, other agents, other people. And so that's kind of what we're seeing here with the sunk cost bias. Is this is one of the ways that we're using that to predict that other agents will, other beings will or will not be biased. When I was looking at the emotions like regret and frustration, and the sunk cost bias, I looked at them kind of side by side as different predictions that people made that kind of go together. But I didn't look at whether or not one caused the other. But I do think that it's kind of another factor, looking at like waste being something that drives the sunk cost bias. I think for people's lives, maybe reflect, taking a step back, as I said before, and kind of reflecting on what the decision that you're making, and maybe the decisions that other people are making, and making sure that we're prioritizing kind of future costs. But you can be kind to yourself too. Sometimes it doesn't really matter, like in the TV dinner situation, which one we pick, and it just feels better to pick that one that was more expensive, and so that's okay too.
Great. Thank you so much, Amy Howard. I'm sure everyone listening to me will agree with me that this was a fascinating glimpse into how our mind works, and not just how we make decisions, but how we predict what others will make, what decision others will make. For everyone that is listening, the next time you find yourself stuck in the sunk cost situation, just as Amy has explained, remember that the very fact that you are able to recognize that waste might be the exact reason why you got yourself in here in the first instance. So you need to take a step back, just as Amy has advised, and try to look at what decision you're trying to take. But at least now you all understand what sunk cost fallacy is, and that we can predict what others may take as a decision when it comes to waste. And to everyone that is listening again, if this conversation has made you think differently about decision making, please, you can read more about Amy's research. There is a 5 recommendation to escape the sunk cost trap. These were some of the things we got from readings on the internet, and you can always do some digging too. But these are just like a summary, 5 behavioral adaptation that can help to call us out of some cost trap, even when we're walking into it. Before you continue any investment, time, money, or effort, ask yourself, if I were starting completely fresh today, knowing what I know now, would I begin this project, this relationship, this investment? Will I start it? And this is called the fresh eye decision rule. It's important because it helps to mentally reset and bypass those emotional attachments that we might have on our past investments, forcing us to evaluate based on future potential only. Now, the second behavioral adaptation is preset your stop loss point. And this calls us to have a rethink. Before starting any significant commitment to anything, try to define clear, specific criteria of when you will like to walk away if things are not going this way. So try to write them down and be emotionally neutral at that point, so that you don't try to bring in what you already have as an experience into this decision. Anytime you've invested into something, your judgment gets clouded. So if you're starting any commitment today, pre that commitment, try to get what will serve as a workout point for you. Pre-commitment removes emotion from future decisions. It's very important that we do that before we even get committed to it. And the third is to calculate opportunity cost. We all did opportunity cost in our economics instead of the sunk cost. This involves when we're tempted to continue because we already invested so much in it, we tend to shift focus to what else we could do with our future time, our future money, or our future energy, especially when we already feel we're stuck in the sunk cost trap. And this is very important because it helps to redirect our brain from dwelling on an unrecoverable past investment to evaluating future possibilities. And the fourth is the third person advice test. Imagine your best friend came to meet you with this same situation. What advice would you give them? So take that same advice, because at that point in time, you're not the person in that shoes. You're advising as a third person. So take that advice that you would have given to a third person as much as you can, because we are much more rational about other people's decision. Yes, because we don't have any emotional attachment to their past investment. And the last, second to the last, is track and celebrate small quits. When you have opportunity to quit something that you've been stuck on, just try to celebrate it a bit more. Keep a wisdom journal where you can record times you successfully walked away from a sunk cost situation, and celebrate this decision and wins, and not as failures, so it won't impede other times you have to walk away. This is very important because our culture naturally stigmatizes quitting, but there are certain strategic abandonments that are usually very intelligent resource management that we can have to adapt so as to suppress the social pressure. The last now is the reverse sunk cost mindset. If we're already in the sunk cost trap, we can still ask, how much have I already invested? Now, instead of asking this question of how much I've already invested, how much am I willing to lose going forward, is the question we should be asking, because you can't tell that the next one you are sinking into it will still yield something great. So this simple refrain shift your brain towards a backward-looking sunk cost, from a backward-looking sunk cost, I mean, towards a forward-looking opportunity cost thinking. Well, all these 5 behavioral adaptations are easier said than done, except when one is in the position. But it's more like something that we might be able to adapt and see if we can really still come out of the sunk cost traps. I hope this helps. And remember that you can also share to as many people that you can, or follow this page so that you'll be able to get more insights or get notified whenever we have a new podcast set out. And before I leave, I would just like to leave this with you, that the most humane thing about us as human is just our ability to predict our own irrationality and be able to take that step back, just as Amy has cautioned us today, so we don't get sunk into the sunk cost trap. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening. And until next time, this is Nosarime Abbey, and bye for now.